London AIM-listed Bluejay Mining is developing the Dundas ilmenite project in Greenland, which it says is the highest grade of ilmenite sands in the world. It recently updated investors with interim numbers and announced that it's pushed back the PFS, or pre-feasibility study, into Q1 2019, and at the same time says it's continuing with its offtake discussions. Rod McIlree is Chief Executive. He joins us now. Rod, welcome back. Interim numbers, first of all. What's the takeaway for investors from these figures you published last week?
Sure, look, I think that the key metric that we tried to get out there really was our activity in Greenland. Obviously, certain aspects of the business are more complicated than others with respect to engagement with offtake partners, etc. But what we really wanted people to understand, I think, was that the Greenland side of the business is actually running very well. We had extensive drill program that should lead to some pretty significant resource upgrades. Those samples, and it appears as though almost every hole there has intersected high-grade ilmenite sands. Gave a little bit of colour on the environmental, the social aspects. That they're progressing they're progressing well, but more recently needed to get up in front of the regulators and get an understanding of how the permit was going to be assessed. And I got back on the weekend, so we can talk about that a little bit in a second as well. Yeah,
moving on, if I can, to talk about the PFS in particular and this delay that's happened. Reading into the release last week, there are some good reasons for this. Just explain what they are and that we shouldn't really read anything else other than positive into this.
Sure. Well, I mean, it follows along the principle of do things once and do them right. We initially identified a development scenario that had all of our infrastructure in Greenland. Through dialogue with various parties, it was made apparent to us that the opportunity to redeploy part of that operation to a location in Quebec made a lot of sense. The original proposal for the development was an economic proposition in its own right, but with the removal of the the permanent magnet separation process down to a lower cost jurisdiction, shall we say, has really had some pretty profound impacts on the economics. So I think the reason for the delay was to really feed that into what will be a one and only study, and it comes back to this principle of it's important that we get this right, because we don't want this mine to start and then it fails or for whatever
Sure,
reason.
Absolutely. Is it going to push back the expected start date of the final mine development to go through to the mining itself?
Look, at this stage, if we go at this alone, possibly. I think what we have been pretty clear about is that we have a number of discussions underway with a number of groups. And any one of those discussions could evolve to a point where that development becomes far more certain and far more cooperative with a potential partner. So whilst we are still progressing everything that we said we were going to do, there have been delays, probably 3 to 6 months. A lot of it's all our fault at the end of the day, but a lot of these things are outside our control. If anything, we were probably too optimistic because we took the view of how quickly we felt we could do things. But some of these independent consultants that we've engaged, they've gotten busy over the last 12 months. So that's had an impact. The optimisation for the feasibility, I think, is going to be a very positive thing. We have certain clarity now about the assessment of our exploitation application. So having come back from Greenland last week or on the weekend, I'm now very comfortable that the assessment of this application will be less than 6 months in its process. So, look, I think we will be in construction next year, come hell or high water, but whether we actually produce anything next year on our own is yet to be seen, but certainly a partner could change that metric.
In answer to that question, you said on several occasions not perhaps possibly maybe doing the whole thing by yourself. Let's take a look first of all at the project generally. And there's been a lot of reports in the press recently about the likes of Rio Tinto, a large mining operation, looking potentially for something like the asset that you've got and the project that you've got. Rio Tinto's got all sorts of problems on its own, ilmenite and other businesses down in South Africa, which is looking to exit. Are you being pursued by large mining companies for a slice of your action?
Look, I mean, the only thing I think is relevant to say is that we're having a lot of conversations with a lot of large players in the space. Nothing has been finalised yet. Some of those conversations are more advanced than others. there is a technical process that a company like Bluejay goes through as it works through to identify offtake partners, and technical relationships. And on a couple of situations here, we're advanced. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of
talk within the industry.
Yeah, but I mean, there's issues within the industry as well, which is sort of precluding any kind of finalisation. I mean, you've got Venator closing a smelter in Europe, one of their furnaces there that melted down a little while ago. You've got the First Nation shutting down a mine in Canada. You've got the Richards Bay. I mean, this is not an industry where focus is probably just at this point on time on us, but that could change.
Do you see a certain catalyst in the process of getting to where you want to be with this particular project in getting these discussions for offtake along the way? I'm thinking perhaps maybe the pushing back of the PFS. Do you think that could well be stalling some of the agreements you're trying to put in place on offtake?
Yeah, I guess I think that's probably, there's something to that. I think, again, it comes down to the fact that PFS will show a very robust mining proposal early next year. But at the end of the day, these guys kind of understand the space. They can look at a project such as Dundas with its potential resource growth over the next sort of 6, 12 and 24 months. And they can see that it's kind of a unique opportunity. So I have total confidence that at some point in the not too distant future we will consummate something with someone. Yeah. But unfortunately, these issues that are going on behind the scenes in the broader sector have just meant that we're not a priority at the moment. So we're getting on with what we can control, and that is the feasibility, the environmental, the application for exploitation.
And among some of the questions we've got from IG clients, what is the monthly annual cash burn? I think at the interims you said you got 11 million sterling, I think it is, isn't it, on the balance sheet, which clearly gives you a little bit of visibility. With the extension of the PFS deadline and so forth, is cash burn and using that money going to be a problem?
No.
Are you going to?
We're actually, we keep it pretty tight. This is one thing that we've done since we started Bluejay, is really tried to align ourselves with shareholders in terms of ownership of the company and not wasting money on silly things. So where I would anticipate being by March of next year is sort of circa £10 million in the bank, with an application in the system, a feasibility that's done, all the EIA, SIA, etc. All of the work programs that have been undertaken in Greenland have been paid for. And, we've got some pretty serious infrastructure up there, a small-scale mining fleet. We've got, storage and accommodation in the village, and civil and site works that have been undertaken. We've sent bulk samples to various customers around the world. So, yeah, I think we're in good shape. Our monthly burn rate is probably about £140,000 a month. Right. But we have, we've got a pretty sizable team. People don't work for free, but certainly we try and keep an eye on costs.
Are you planning on raising money? Do you see it as a way to get you through to that the final straight, or as you say, perhaps maybe a partner comes in and helps you out financially?
Yeah, I mean, it's always dangerous to say never, but I think that for the foreseeable future, we're going to take very much a wait and see approach to this, because we know internally that what we own here is very special, just the Dundas, not to mention Disco, but certainly the Dundas asset will continue to grow in profile. The resources there are going to continue to grow. The grade is going to continue to grow, in my opinion. And at some point, that recognition will crystallise into something. And it's at that point that we will worry about funding. We have a budget in place that gets us through to the start of 2020, just continuing on as we are. And having put in place more infrastructure next year if we have to go this alone. It's got a lot of variables. The price of titanium, I think, if you look at the sector with all these issues, there is a real tightening going on here. Now that is good for us in the medium term, but it's not so good for us in the short term. But we can survive.
You mentioned Disco. Let's talk about that. This is nickel, copper, platinum, isn't it? What's going on there at the moment? Are you able to spend much time on that?
Yeah, we had a field team there this year. We did anticipate doing quite a large regional survey using some sort of pretty cutting-edge technology that's ex-military in its application. Unfortunately, because of the plane, it was an Austin Bridgeport company out of North America that has privatised what is essentially a military technology. They, to put that into an aeroplane such that they can do that aerial survey, couldn't get FAA approval for that plane in time, so they missed the window, so it's going to happen in April. But I think it's fair to say that we continually get inquiries about our plans for Disco, and we are very polite in the way that we sort of say, look, we have some short-term plans. When it comes time to drill this project, I think we will look at partners because it's not a straightforward thing. But the risk-reward profile here is really quite, it's not something you see in the minerals game too often.
Yeah. One other question has come up which is interesting. It refers back to the point you mentioned about Greenland, which I want to expand on if you can. It seems to be getting more attention as a place to do business. Are you hearing any vibes either to the contrary or anything that gives you the hope that it is actually getting a better place to be a miner?
Look, I think the challenge when you move into Greenland is that when you first arrive, you underestimate the time and the cost of everything. Once you've been there for as long as we have, you can sort of streamline a lot of your work programs. We see it as very low risk jurisdiction. You know, I was up in Greenland, I met with the Prime Minister, the Minister for Mines, all the regulators, and every single one of those people gave me the same answer, that this project is not an intrusive operation into the environment. The conclusion from our environmental impact assessment says the same thing. They're telling us that, you know, anything up to less than 6 months, maybe a couple of months less than 6 months, should be the approval timeline for that exploitation licence. So that's important to have that knowledge when you're sort of coming out early next year with a feasibility and application and, you know, potential partnering or offtake or whatever it may be. You know, I know, again, it's sort of this 6-month delay really has come about because I think we underestimated the amount of time we could get out of some of our consultants. These guys are busy and have become more so in the last 12 months. You know, if it was us and if we were able to do these studies internally, we would have done this probably, you know, a little bit quicker maybe, but that removes the independence aspect of it. So it needs to be done this way, and it's just taking longer.
Yeah. Let's bring up the share price. Take a look at what's happening with Bluejay Mining. As I say, AIM listed. It's come off a lot recently. This goes back to the highs that we saw on April this year, up at, what, 26 pence. Here we are now at 12 and a quarter. What's priced in? I mean, you've mentioned the different assets that you've got, and I think you've got more assets as well we haven't even spoken about. What's priced in here at this sort of level in this stock?
Look, I think that my personal opinion here, and you know, I'm not one to give financial advice, but I think the existing resource, really, the Murasak 96 million tonnes at 7% ilmenite is basically reflected there. There's no upside for the point of view of the mining licence. There's no inclusion of the EIA, SIA being positive. There's certainly no inclusion there that, you know, with any type of partnering, if that were to occur with this development, that the equity dilution for Bluejay could be quite low, if not non-existent. And it doesn't include any future resource growth. You know, we've had an excellent year at Italak this year, and we've discovered a second delta, and we've marched this operation down the entire length of the 30 kilometres of material here. You know, it's highly likely that there will be a pretty significant resource upgrade on the back of this. So I think, you know, where we are now, a lot of this, when we were 26, probably had quite a bit of those things built into it because that was the expectation at that time that we were going to deliver those. With the delay, I think we've gone back to the basics of just being this is just Dundas, and hopefully as we move forward and start to put these things down, you'll see that value change. Yeah,
so what do you see then as the catalyst? I think you just mentioned a couple of them. What do you think that investors should be watching out for from here on in that you're going to be doing, which should give them the confidence that this is mispriced?
Sure. I think the one that we can sort of give a little bit more detail on now is the optimisation of the feasibility study, because we have that mapped out quite clearly. So between now and the end of the year, we'll have announcements on the EIA, the successful completion of that and the fact that it indicates a fairly benign operation, the SIA, the feasibility early next year, and the application. I think that the things that are outside our control, such as potential customer side of the business and anything that entails, could happen at any time. But it's just difficult for me to sort of, you know, I mean, for me to sort of say when and what it will be. But we are comfortable that this is a compelling opportunity for these refiners because this material is consistent across the entire length of the beach. And those, you know, that characteristic being low in deleterious elements and being homogeneous, that's what resonates with these guys. You know, the fact that this is unoxidised, fresh material, Mother Nature has sort of deposited this on this beach for us, and there's been a lot of savings up front from a capital just to mine this in its initial form. So, look, we're in good shape company-wise. It's just that these delays have, I think, shaken a little bit of confidence. Yeah. But we're confident that these delays will be dealt with in the next 3, 4, 5 months.
Well, we look forward to speaking to you again when it's all ironed out. But
yeah,
Rod, in the meantime, thanks indeed for joining us. Rod McIlree is the Chief Executive of Bluejay Mining.